Democratic Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Ron Wyden just dramatically escalated their feud with the Supreme Court. They are now moving beyond words and demanding action, and they are laser focused on one Supreme Court justice, Clarence Thomas. I'll go over all the details of this bombshell, and I've got my hands on a letter that they sent that surely has Clarence Thomas sweating. We'll go over everything right now. This last year has been a rough one for Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Starting in April of 2023, a report was published by ProPublica that detailed lavish trips received by Clarence Thomas from his billionaire friend Harlan Crow. Now, Clarence Thomas did not report these gifts on his financial disclosure forms, and that is a problem. After the report came out, he quickly amended his financial forms to disclose these trips.
There's some Supreme Court news to tell you about today, and brand new financial disclosure forms made public just today. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas acknowledged that in the last year, he took 3 trips aboard a private jet that belongs to his billionaire friend, Republican megadonor Harlan Crow.
Then in August of 2023, ProPublica revealed even more trips that Clarence Thomas accepted as gifts, and he amended his financial forms once again. And in that same month, August 2023, the New York Times published a story about Clarence Thomas receiving a loan for around $270,000 in 1999 to purchase a huge motor coach that he used to travel around the country. Now, what was interesting about this loan is that he just paid interest payments every year instead of the principal. And then suddenly, about 8 years later, the loan was forgiven and he no longer had to make any other payments. This was fishy as can be, and this is what is now leading to the biggest problems for Clarence Thomas.
The IRS considers debt forgiveness as a form of income, but Thomas never reported it on his financial disclosure forms, a likely violation of federal ethics rules. And he never reported it on his tax returns, potentially owing money to the IRS.
These Supreme Court justices have been acting like they're above the law and don't have to report all these gifts they receive from their billionaire friends. But now, Senators Sheldon Whitehouse and Ron Wyden are demanding action. And in a letter sent to the Department of Justice, they are asking for an investigation to be opened into Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And not just any type of investigation, they are demanding that a special counsel be assigned to look into the possibility that Clarence Thomas committed crimes. Wait until you hear the language they used in this letter. Check this out. Dated July 3rd from the U.S. Senate to Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice, it says, "Dear Attorney General Garland, we write to request that you appoint a special counsel to investigate possible violations of federal ethics and tax laws by Associate Justice of the Supreme Court Clarence Thomas. Over the past year, public reporting and Senate investigations have uncovered evidence of repeated and willful omissions of gifts and income from Justice Thomas's financial disclosure reports required by the Ethics in Government Act. The Senate is investigating these omissions as it considers improvements to ethics and tax laws. The scale of the potential ethics violations by Justice Thomas and the willful pattern of disregard for ethics laws exceeds the conduct of other government officials investigated by the Department of Justice for similar violations. The breadth of the omissions uncovered to date and the serious possibility of additional tax fraud and false statement violations by Justice Thomas and his associates warrant the appointment of a special counsel to investigate this misconduct. The Senate is not a prosecutorial body, and the Supreme Court has no fact-finding function of its own, making the executive role all the more important if there is ever to be any complete determination of the facts." So Senators Whitehouse and Wyden are accusing Clarence Thomas of possibly committing a crime of tax fraud. That is a serious escalation in their rhetoric and investigation into the Supreme Court. They go on to describe the evidence of the misconduct, which I briefly alluded to a little earlier. These are the trips from Harlan Crow, the loan from Clarence Thomas's friend to purchase the motor coach that he supposedly just made interest payments on, and then the principal was forgiven, which again, you have to disclose that stuff or you're committing tax fraud. They conclude the letter by saying the following: "We do not make this request lightly. The evidence assembled thus far plainly suggests that Justice Thomas has committed numerous willful violations of federal ethics and false statement laws and raises significant questions about whether he and his wealthy benefactors have complied with their federal tax obligations. Presented with opportunities to resolve questions about his conduct, Justice Thomas has maintained a suspicious silence." Suspicious silence indeed. That's a nice way to put it. No government official should be above the law. Supreme Court justices are properly expected to obey laws designed to prevent conflicts of interest and the appearance of impropriety and to comply with the federal tax code. We therefore request that you appoint a special counsel authorized to investigate potential criminal violations by Justice Thomas under the disclosure, false statement, and tax laws. Pursue leads of related criminal violations by donors, lenders, and intermediate corporate entities, and determine whether any such loans and gifts were provided pursuant to a coordinated enterprise or plan. So this is some serious stuff right here. These senators are essentially accusing Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas of having committed a crime. That is not something you go back from right there. And I hope the DOJ opens this investigation because Clarence Thomas sounds corrupt as all hell. And every time the media exposed some of his corrupt practices, he had to amend his financial disclosure forms. But there's no real way to oversee what the Supreme Court's up to. So this is the only method for the public to regain trust in the Supreme Court. And can you imagine if they actually end up charging him with some crimes? What a scandal that would be, and we might just see our first Supreme Court justice impeached. Though I have a feeling if Clarence Thomas were to be charged with a crime, which just sounds wild to even say out loud, then he would probably step down from the position. Though who knows, knowing these guys, the hubris is high and they might try to fight it tooth and nail. But boy, these are wild times that we're living in right now, that there are senators accusing a Supreme Court justice of having committed crimes and demanding the DOJ open up an investigation into that Supreme Court justice. This is on top of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez saying she's ready to introduce articles of impeachment against the Supreme Court justice or justices. We don't know what her plan is there. Perhaps she's ready to move forward in the House and lay the groundwork for when the Democrats take over in January. If we win in November, which I think we will, then we can begin the process of impeaching one of these justices. And it might just be Clarence Thomas for these exact things that are described by Senators Whitehouse and Wyden in their letter to the DOJ. So hold on tightly, folks. The ride is about to get bumpy.